On July 20th, 1969, the world watched in awe as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin took humanity's first steps on the moon. It was a moment that seemed to unite the planet, as millions of people gathered around their televisions, radios and newspapers, holding their breath as Armstrong uttered those now legendary words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The grainy black and white images beamed from the lunar surface became instantly iconic, symbolizing the pinnacle of human achievement and technological progress. Or so we were told. For every person who celebrated, there were others who watched with skepticism, questioning whether what they saw was truly real. It was a moment of triumph, a symbol of human achievement. The world erupted in celebration with people cheering in the streets and newspapers declaring the impossible had been accomplished. The United States had seemingly won the ultimate race, planting its flag on the lunar surface for all to see. But for some, it's the greatest deception ever staged, the moon landing hoax. Doubts began to surface almost immediately, with skeptics pointing to inconsistencies in the footage, strange shadows, and the absence of stars in the lunar sky.
Things you only talk about at the back of the cave.
This theory isn't just internet fringe, it's a full-blown narrative with its own evidence and a surprising number of believers. Over the decades, countless books, documentaries and articles have been dedicated to dissecting every frame of the Apollo missions, fueling debates that continue to this day. The claim? The US, desperate to beat the Soviets in the Cold War space race, faked the landing, maybe even with the help of legendary filmmaker Stanley Kubrick, who some allege was recruited to stage the moonwalk on a secret Hollywood set. The theory suggests that the government orchestrated an elaborate ruse, using cutting-edge film technology and carefully crafted sets to convince the world of their triumph. So, how do we approach such a monumental claim? By digging into the evidence and asking tough questions. We'll look at the arguments from both sides, examining the details that have fueled suspicion and the scientific explanations that seek to debunk them. We'll examine photos, physics, and the political climate of the era. From the authenticity of the lunar rocks brought back to Earth, to the motivations of a nation locked in a fierce rivalry with the Soviet Union, every angle will be explored. Our goal isn't to tell you what to believe, but to arm you with the facts so you can decide for yourself. We'll present the most compelling evidence, the most persistent doubts, and the context that shaped this extraordinary chapter in history. Get ready to explore the mysteries of the moon landing, from the curious case of the waving flag, to the missing stars in the lunar sky, to the technical challenges of surviving and broadcasting from the moon's harsh environment. We'll break down the most famous anomalies and see what the experts have to say. Was it truly a giant leap for mankind or the most elaborate hoax in history? The answers may surprise you. Let's find out together. Before we dive into the world of conspiracy theories and speculation, let's take a moment to set the stage and truly understand the world of 1969. This was a time of immense change, uncertainty, and ambition, a period that shaped not just America, but the entire globe. The 1960s were a decade defined by revolution and unrest. Across the United States, people marched for civil rights, demanding equality and justice. The Vietnam War raged on, dividing the nation and sparking massive protests. Meanwhile, the ever-present shadow of the Cold War loomed large, with the US and the Soviet Union locked in a tense ideological and military standoff. But beyond the protests and politics, another battle was being waged, one that reached far beyond Earth's atmosphere. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a fierce technological arms race, each determined to prove their superiority. Space became the ultimate frontier, a stage for both nations to showcase their power, innovation, and determination. The Soviets struck first, launching Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite, in 1957. Then in 1961 they sent Yuri Gagarin into orbit, making him the first human to travel into space. These achievements sent shockwaves through the United States, igniting a sense of urgency, and a drive to catch up and then surpass their Cold War rivals. In response, President John F. Kennedy made a bold and historic promise to the American people and the world. The United States would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade was out. This was more than a scientific goal. It was a statement of national pride, a challenge to the Soviets, and a rallying cry for a generation. Thus, the Apollo program was born. It became one of the most ambitious undertakings in human history, mobilizing over 400,000 scientists, engineers, and workers. Together they designed, built, and tested the technology that would make lunar travel possible, overcoming countless obstacles and setbacks along the way. On July 16, 1969, after years of preparation and anticipation, the mighty Saturn V rocket stood ready on the launch pad. Astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins climbed aboard, embarking on a journey that would capture the imagination of the world. As the countdown reached zero, millions of people around the globe watched the launch live on television or listened on the radio. Families gathered in living rooms, students huddled around classroom TVs, and crowds assembled in public squares, all holding their breath as the rocket thundered into the sky. 4 days later, after a tense and suspenseful journey through the void of space, Armstrong and Aldrin prepared to descend to the lunar surface in the lunar module, aptly named Eagle. In mission control, engineers and scientists watched every move, their nerves stretched to the breaking point. On July 20, 1969, the world held its breath as the words echoed across the airwaves. "Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." An estimated 650 million people tuned in, making it one of the most watched events in human history. Then, in a moment that would be replayed for generations, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, leaving a single footprint in the dust and declaring, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." The world erupted in celebration, awe, and pride. This is the official story, one of courage, ingenuity, and the triumph of the human spirit. The Apollo 11 mission became a symbol of what humanity could achieve when united by a common goal, and it was celebrated with parades, headlines, and worldwide acclaim. But for some, the story didn't end there. Questions began to surface almost immediately. Was everything as it seemed? Could such an incredible feat really have been accomplished with the technology of the time? Skeptics and conspiracy theorists started to dig deeper, searching for inconsistencies and hidden truths. So, was it all as it appeared on TV screens around the world? Or is there more to the story than meets the eye? Let's look closer and see what we can uncover. You'd think such a historic moment would be beyond doubt. But in 1976, Bill Kaysing published "We Never Went to the Moon," planting the first major seeds of the hoax theory. Kaysing, a former technical writer, claimed inside knowledge and pointed to supposed anomalies in NASA's photos and technology. His arguments were simple, easy to grasp, and caught on with the public. The 1978 film Capricorn 1, about a faked Mars landing, blurred the line between fiction and reality, fueling suspicion. With the rise of the internet, the theory exploded, photos and videos endlessly dissected by believers worldwide. What started as whispers became a roar. The moon hoax theory is now a permanent part of our culture, but what's the evidence? One of the most iconic and enduring images from the Apollo 11 mission is Buzz Aldrin standing on the lunar surface, saluting the American flag. This photograph has become a symbol of human achievement, representing the moment when humanity first set foot on another world. Yet for all its power and inspiration, this image has also become a focal point for one of the most persistent moon landing conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theorists often point to the flag in this photo and ask a seemingly simple question. If there's no wind on the moon, why does the flag appear to wave or ripple as if caught in a breeze? To many, this detail seems to defy the known laws of physics and suggests something suspicious. In both the still photographs and the video footage from the Apollo missions, the flag appears to have ripples and folds. Some claim this is clear evidence that the flag was being blown by a fan on a movie set, rather than standing in the airless environment of the moon. However, the real explanation is far more interesting and rooted in clever engineering. NASA anticipated that a traditional flag would simply hang limp in the moon's vacuum, so they designed a special flagpole with a horizontal rod along the top. This rod held the flag outstretched, making it visible in photographs and giving it that iconic look. The so-called waving effect is actually the result of the flag wobbling after being planted in the lunar soil. With no air resistance to slow it down, the flag's motion continues for much longer than it would on Earth, creating the illusion of fluttering. The ripples and bunching in the fabric are not the result of wind, but rather the astronauts' struggle to fully extend the horizontal rod. The flag was tightly packed for the journey to the moon, and when the astronauts tried to set it up, The fabric remained creased and wrinkled. In the vacuum of space, there's nothing to dampen the motion. So when the astronauts touched or adjusted the flag, it continued to move for a surprisingly long time, swaying gently back and forth in the low gravity. On Earth, air would quickly slow down and stop any movement of a flag. But on the moon, with no atmosphere, even a small push can set the flag in motion for several seconds, making it look as if it's waving. Far from being evidence of a hoax, the waving flag is actually a testament to the ingenuity of NASA's engineers and the unique physics of the lunar environment. Every detail, from the flag's design to its movement, has a logical explanation grounded in science. It's a classic example of how our Earth-based intuition can mislead us when we encounter the unfamiliar conditions of space. What seems strange at first glance often has a simple scientific answer. The detail in these images is compelling, and it's easy to see why people might be puzzled. But when we look closer, the explanation is straightforward and fascinating. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. The story of the lunar flag is a perfect example of how science and engineering can solve mysteries that at first seem impossible. Let's keep digging deeper into the facts and uncover more about the incredible journey to the moon. Another favorite claim: why are there no stars in Apollo photos? The lunar sky is pitch black, but no stars are visible, proof, some say, of a soundstage. But the answer lies in photography, not conspiracy. The lunar surface and astronauts' suits were brilliantly lit by the sun. To avoid overexposure, cameras used fast shutter speeds and small apertures. Stars, though bright to the naked eye, are too faint to appear in such quick exposures. It's the same reason you don't see stars in daytime photos on Earth. The bright foreground overwhelms the faint starlight. NASA didn't forget the stars, they just weren't captured by the camera settings. The missing stars aren't a smoking gun, they're a lesson in how cameras work. Sometimes what's missing is just as important as what's there. On to the next mystery. Shadows in Apollo photos often point in different directions. Shouldn't they be parallel if the sun is the only light source? Skeptics say this proves multiple studio lights were used, but the explanation is perspective and terrain. On uneven lunar ground, shadows can appear to diverge or converge, just like railroad tracks seem to meet at the horizon. The wide-angle lenses used by astronauts also distort lines, making parallel shadows look skewed. The lunar surface isn't flat. Craters and slopes change how shadows fall. What looks like a lighting trick is actually a natural effect of perspective and landscape. The sun was the only light source. The ground just played tricks on our eyes. Once again, the simplest answer is often the right one. The shadows tell a story, but not the one conspiracy theorists expect. Let's move on. The Van Allen radiation belts, two zones of charged particles around Earth, are often cited as an insurmountable barrier. The claim astronauts would have been killed by radiation passing through. But Apollo engineers knew about the belts and planned accordingly. The spacecraft traveled quickly through the thinnest parts, spending only about 2 hours in the belts. The aluminum hull provided significant shielding. Astronauts wore dosimeters, and their exposure was well within safe limits, comparable to a year's work at a nuclear plant. The danger was real, but manageable. NASA didn't ignore the problem. They solved it. The Van Allen belts weren't an impassable wall. They were a calculated risk, not a showstopper. Sometimes science is about smart planning, not just brute force. The radiation argument doesn't hold up. Let's look at the technology. Could 1960s technology really get us to the moon? Skeptics point to the Apollo guidance computer, less powerful than a modern calculator. But it was purpose-built, designed to solve navigation equations, not play games. The software was efficient and robust, written by top engineers. The lunar module looked flimsy, but it was built for space, not Earth, lightweight, with gold foil for thermal protection. Every ounce mattered. Form followed function. The primitive tech was actually a marvel of focused engineering. The Apollo missions were about doing more with less. Sometimes simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. The technology was up to the task. Every conspiracy needs a motive. For the moon hoax, it's the Cold War. The space race was a battle for global prestige between the US and the Soviet Union. After Soviet victories, the pressure on America was immense. Failure wasn't an option. National pride and political power were at stake. The theory goes, if NASA couldn't deliver, faking it would secure victory and demoralize the Soviets. A staged landing would be the ultimate propaganda win. The Cold War was an era of paranoia and secret operations, so the idea of a faked moon landing doesn't seem impossible to some, but is motive enough? Let's weigh the evidence. So where does that leave us? We've examined waving flags, missing stars, odd shadows, radiation, technology, and motive. On one side, NASA's account, backed by thousands of experts and physical evidence, like 842 pounds of moon rocks and laser reflectors still used today. On the other, a compelling story of anomalies, skepticism, and distrust of authority. Most scientists and historians are confident we landed on the moon. Even the Soviets tracking Apollo never called foul. But curiosity means questioning, not just accepting. The final verdict is yours. Was it a leap for mankind or the greatest hoax ever told? When you look at the moon, what do you believe?